This week's case is about Shawn Grate. He murdered 5 women in Ohio and kept another woman captive for 2 days. So, let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Brandy and it is time for a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back my feline friends, and a big shout out to my feline fans who help support this channel. So I'm sitting kind of lower than I usually am. I'm using my new camera. I'm not quite happy with the settings yet, but I'm still learning. So please bear with me. I'm sure my wrinkles and lines show up very well on camera. So do I look 44 now, everybody? Everybody tells me I look younger than I am, which I love. It's very flattering, but I just feel like in this video, I'm really showing my age. And this is the 3rd time I've recorded this video because the first time, I don't know what happened, but the file was corrupt and it didn't work. And then the second time I went to record it, the damn battery died. So this is the 3rd time. So I really know this case in and out at this point. So, this case was a suggestion by ASMR Tingled Pink, not Tickled Pink, Tingled Pink. So thank you, Tingled Pink, for your suggestion. This case has a lot of information in it, so I hope the video doesn't end up being too long. But all the information I wanted to share with you, I think is important to tell this story. So, Shawn Grate. Boy, this guy was a peach. So Shawn Grate was born August 8th, 1976 in Marion, Ohio. Shawn's mother, Teresa, was actually married at 14 years old, and she was abused by her husband. She was able to finally get out of this marriage after they had a daughter named Barbara. So after Teresa got out of this marriage, then she was working as a dancer in a bar. And that's where she met Terry Grate, who was Shawn's father. The two got married in 1974, and they ended up having 2 boys, Jason and Shawn. Now, Teresa definitely wasn't really mother of the year. See, she was still young and she liked to go out and party. So Barbara, her oldest daughter, Shawn's half-sister, stated that Teresa would probably leave like on a Friday and they wouldn't see her again until Sunday night. So there was a lot of times when Shawn was a toddler, he'd go hungry all weekend because his mom wasn't there to feed him and his dad was working. So as the older sister, she did her best. So in school, Shawn did have some problems. He was actually held back in kindergarten and 1st grade. Now in 1982, when Shawn was 6 years old, his parents did end up getting a divorce and his mother gained custody of all 3 children. Now Teresa was still in this partying ways and she would have many boyfriends. She would just jump in one relationship to another, and Shawn pretty much hated all of her boyfriends. So when Shawn was 11, Teresa actually took off to Kentucky and abandoned the kids. She took off to Kentucky to see her latest man. So Shawn and Jason would then go live with their father, Terry, at that time. Now, while Shawn was living with his father, he would excel in baseball. He really liked baseball. He was really good at it, and that was kind of like his thing to keep him out of trouble. Unfortunately, in high school, he ended up breaking his arm. And while he was being treated for the broken arm, they found a tumor as well. And so he had to have surgery. And then after the surgery, it kind of left him with limited use of his arm, is what it sounds like. So he could no longer play baseball. So because he couldn't play baseball anymore, he had depression, but he had these moments where he just shut down. A high school girlfriend would say that while she was dating Shawn in high school, he would have these days, like it would go on 2 or 3 days at a time, where he would just lay on the couch or he would sleep for days. And then he'd sort of come out of the depressional funk and he would be the Shawn that everybody loved. They also seen at this time, because of Shawn's depression, this inner rage was coming out in him. Barbara, Shawn's half-sister, stated about this time that is when Shawn started talking openly about his fantasy of killing his mother due to the trauma and neglect that he went through as a child. And this obviously would cause some family issues. But through this depression states and this inner rage, out in public, Shawn was looked at as the nicest guy. Everybody was drawn to him. He was very personable. He was good looking. He had these piercing blue eyes. So he did well with the ladies as well. And as his girlfriends would state, he was a dream to date. He would dote on his girlfriends and he would treat them like a queen, in the beginning anyway. So in 1994, Shawn was arrested for grabbing his girlfriend around the throat. In 1995, after Shawn graduated high school, he was again arrested for breaking into another girlfriend's home and choking her. See a pattern here? He likes to choke people. In 1999, Shawn broke into his ex-girlfriend's house and he threatened her and her sister with a butcher knife. Now, luckily, nobody was hurt badly. There was a couple cuts on the girlfriend's hands, but she was able to call the police, and then Shawn was arrested, and he actually spent 4 years in jail for this incident, and he got out in 2003. Now, after he got out of jail in 2003, he went on to live his life, but it included a pretty extensive criminal record. So just in summary, in 2007, he was charged with falsification, identity, and obstruction theft. In 2009, he was charged with possession of marijuana. In 2010, he was charged with domestic violence of a girlfriend, which we will talk about. In 2013, he was arrested for stolen property. In 2004, he was arrested again for drugs. And in 2016, he was arrested for the kidnapping and then later murder of women. And through all this, from 1996 on, he was constantly in trouble for not paying his child support. Oh yes, everyone, this guy had 3 kids, which we will talk about as well. But let's back up a little bit and let's talk about the 2010 domestic violence charge. Now, Shawn at the time was dating a woman named Christina Hildreth. Now, Christina was actually Shawn's longest relationship. They lasted 5 years. So Christina had just gotten a divorce and she had 2 children from this marriage. And she moved into the area to kind of do a fresh new start. Now, she was able to meet Shawn through some mutual friends, and the two began dating. After a couple of months, Shawn asked Christina to move in with him along with her children. Now, her children were older. They were like 10 to 12. They weren't like young. Shawn at the time was living in his father's house. Now, his dad was not living there, but his dad had moved out and was actually wanting the place renovated so he could sell it later. So he allowed Shawn to live in the place and renovate it. I am so sorry about my dogs. He allowed Shawn to move into the place and renovate it, which took a couple of years. So Shawn had asked Christina to move into his father's house with him, so Christina and her kids moved in. Shawn was actually really great with the kids, and Christina said her kids actually loved Shawn, that Shawn never showed them any violence or anything like that. But, you know, as always in these cases, Shawn started being a little bit more violent to Christina, which it started out as, he would push her or he'd accidentally hit her, and then there would be an apology and an excuse, like he didn't know his own strength, he was sorry, and it would just, escalate from there. So the violence started getting more and more throughout the years, but Shawn would always do it behind closed doors so the kids would not see this. Now, Christina would go on to explain how Shawn really became paranoid at one point in their relationship and told Christina that she wasn't allowed to socialize anymore and that she really couldn't leave the house besides going to her job. And it got so bad at one point that Shawn told Christina she's not even allowed to look out the windows of the house. Now, near the end of the relationship, one day Shawn had called up Christina's sister and said, "Hey, I'm tired of these kids living here, so you need to take them." Of course, Christina objected, but Shawn not only threatened her, but told her that he was threatening the lives of her children, so Christina let her kids go with her sister so they would be safe. Now, obviously, this was the beginning of the end for Christina. Now, on the day that Christina finally left Shawn, she stated that they had been fighting on and off all day, which was a regular thing by that time. But she said during one of the arguments, they were in the bedroom and Shawn had actually grabbed her and flipped her backwards onto the bed where she was on her back, and he hit her in the face twice. He then sat on her and started choking her. Now, Shawn did stop. Christina got up to go into the bathroom to wash her face because she was bleeding. Well, she said as she was on her way to the bathroom, Shawn grabbed her again by the neck and then literally started throwing her around the house, up against the walls, up against the furniture. Now, somehow Shawn finally calmed down after this whole incident, and Christina had convinced Shawn to take her to the hospital because in the midst of this incident, Christina found that she broke her hand. Shawn agreed to take her as long as, she kept her mouth shut. Now, at the hospital staff were pretty suspicious because, here's Christina sitting here with a broken hand and she's beat to hell. So they finally found a way to kind of pull Shawn away from Christina at the hospital, and then Christina told hospital staff what exactly happened. So the police were called, but Shawn fled the hospital. He actually went back to his dad's house, which the police checked, but he was hiding in the attic. So he actually hid in the attic for 2 days, and then he was finally found and arrested. And he was charged with domestic violence, and he got 6 months in jail for this. Now, Christina did have a protective order taken out on Shawn for obvious reasons, but it seemed like Shawn didn't give a crap. He was actually writing letters to Christina from jail, threatening her and telling her that when he got out of jail, she was really in for it. Well, Christina, of course, was scared, so she decided just to move away from the area and just start anew again. So she moved away from the area, she changed her car, she changed her phone number, and she changed her job. When Shawn was released from jail, when his sentence was up, allegedly he went around asking all of Christina's friends if he could get a hold of her and trying to make excuses to try to find her, but luckily her friends were smart enough not to give up her location or where she was found, and eventually Shawn gave up and moved on to the next person. Now, Shawn only really saw women as meal tickets, and he took advantage of them. He lived off them. See, he didn't really hold a job, and one of the reasons he didn't hold a job is because in his mind, if he had a job, he had to pay child support. And at one point, he actually got charged, and I didn't know this was a thing, but it must be in Ohio, that he got charged for avoiding employment. So for the reason of not paying child support. However, if you go to his Facebook page, which hasn't been updated since 2015, it does say that he was self-employed. Apparently, he got a hold of some equipment that some people gave him, because they thought he was so great, and he was making wooden signs, but I'm sure that wasn't paying the bills. Now, Shawn did get married at least once in his life, and he would end up having 3 children from 3 different women. His first child was born in 1996 from an old high school girlfriend. The girlfriend eventually left him because she was tired of getting hit. His second child was born in 1999, and the mother of that child was the girlfriend that he threatened with a butcher knife. So in 2011, he met Amber Bowman, and they ended up having a daughter together as well. So let's talk about this relationship. So Shawn met Amber in church of all places. See how this guy operates? So Amber said that Shawn was quiet, she was very attracted to his piercing eyes, and that he always came across as kind and warm. So she decided to ask him out. The beginning of the relationship was a dream, as it always is with Shawn. Now, 4 months into the relationship, Amber found out she was pregnant. She told Shawn was excited, and a month later, in December 2011, the two got married. Now, Amber stated after they were hitched, that's when things began to change. He became very paranoid and possessive, and he wouldn't let Amber socialize. Sound familiar? Now, Amber is still pregnant at this time, and one day she said that Shawn was in another part of the house when his cell phone rang. So she picked up his cell phone and answered it. I mean, that's pretty norm for healthy relationships. I answer my husband's cell phone, he answers mine if I can't get to it. And she said on the other line was this woman asking for Shawn. As they chatted a little bit, Amber found out that Shawn was cheating on her. The woman on the end of the line said she was very sorry. She did not know that Shawn was married, and that Shawn had told her that he lived with his pregnant sister. So Amber confronts Shawn about this information, and Shawn tells Amber that the married life just is not for him and that he was actually leaving. So he moved out of the house and actually got a seedy dive hotel room and continued to see other women and even like sex workers. So Amber is devastated because she fell in love with this other Shawn, and she kind of sort of is waiting for Shawn to come to his senses. Well, by the summer of 2012, Amber gives birth to a baby girl, and she thinks that Shawn is going to come back because of the baby. He does not. So Amber realizes that it is time that she needs to move on and just let everything go. So Amber files for divorce. The divorce was finalized in December of 2012, so they were married exactly a year. Now, during the divorce, Amber also files for child support, and she knows that Shawn has other children that he has not paid child support on, so she puts a contingency in the contract that states if he does not pay child support, he gets no visitation rights. This sent Shawn into a rage. He didn't care about the divorce, but he cared about seeing his baby daughter. So then he starts threatening Amber and Amber's family. And at one point, he said to Amber, "If I cannot see my daughter, then no one can." So Amber was able to get a restraining order taken out of him due to that comment. So a number of years go by, and in 2014, Amber decides to let Shawn visit their daughter, who is now 4 years old. And Amber said that she had this kind of hope that he was, went through his phase and maybe he was the old Shawn that she fell in love with, and so she invited him over. She stated that the meeting went very well and that the two were even flirty with each other, and at some point Amber and Shawn started kind of wrestling, like play wrestling, and something in Shawn triggered, and he ended up flipping Amber onto her back on the floor, sitting on her and putting his hands around her neck. She said that he didn't squeeze hard, but the look in his eye scared the shit out of her. So she had calmly asked Shawn, "Can you get off me? This is no longer playing," which Shawn did get off of her. She sent Shawn on his way, and she never met with him alone again. So in 2015, Shawn was with a woman named Candace Cunningham. And they were engaged, according to this old Facebook post I found. And then, as soon as they were engaged, Candace then disappeared. More on that later. So it wasn't only women that Shawn had like an anger issue with. It's basically if he didn't get what he wanted, his rage would come out. He had a male friend one time that he texted and said, "Hey, can I borrow some money?" When the male friend was like, no, because he knew Shawn very well and he would never see this money again, Shawn became angry that his, request was declined. And he allegedly texted back to this male friend, "Meet the other me." So the friend said that this really creeped him out and he ended their friendship after that. So unfortunately, like a lot of cases go that I've covered, Shawn's violence escalated. He never stayed in jail for more than a couple months, and women actually started disappearing at this point. In 2015, the body of Rebecca Lucy was discovered in the woods. Now, Rebecca was a known sex worker, and ultimately, after an autopsy, she had been out in the elements for some time, so she was pretty decomposed. They did an autopsy, and all they really could find is that she had drugs in her system, so they put her death as an overdose, and we'll come back to her. Now, that same year that Rebecca disappeared, that's when Candace Cunningham disappeared. She was the one that was living with Shawn and engaged to him. So Candace had lived with Shawn. Well, I should say they were squatting in an abandoned house because by this time Shawn, his dad had sold the house, so Shawn had no place to stay and he didn't have a job, so he couldn't pay rent. And so him and Candace were squatting in an abandoned house. So Candace told her mother of her and Shawn's engagement, and she stated that they were both going to move to North Carolina because Shawn had, too much heat on him from all his legal troubles there in Ohio. Now, shortly after that call, the abandoned house that they were squatting in had caught on fire and burned to the ground. Now, police knew that the fire was set intentionally, but they didn't do much investigative work around it because apparently what they said is they had no idea how to proceed with an arson investigation on an abandoned property. So basically all they did was put out the flames and walked away. So by 2006, Shawn is single again, and he broke into another vacant house in the area. Apparently, there's a lot of vacant houses in the area at the time, and he began squatting in that one. Now, of course, this abandoned house had no running water or electricity, so he would eat a lot of his meals at the Salvation Army Center, and that is where he met a woman we're going to call Jane Doe. Now, Shawn and Jane became friends, and they would go on long walks, talk about life and the Bible, as Jane was very religious, so Shawn pretended to be too. Again, it's a game. Now, Shawn was interested in Jane romantically, and he, made his intentions clear with her, but she didn't see Shawn in that way. She saw Shawn as more of a big brother and wasn't into Shawn in that way. So she, in the best way, politely let him down of, sorry, not interested. Shawn seemed to be okay with it, but we know inside he was probably raging, right? Now, through Jane, Shawn would meet Elizabeth Griffin, who was Jane's neighbor. And 2 weeks after he met Elizabeth was shopping in town at a local Walmart, and after she left the Walmart, she was never seen again. Now, her friends, including Jane, had filed a missing persons report, but the police did very little about it. It was simply kind of mentioned passingly in local media, but with no family members in the area for Elizabeth, to keep the case in the spotlight of where is she, she was kind of quickly, forgotten. The case was open, but nobody was really doing anything with it. Now, shortly after Elizabeth's disappearance, Shawn was at a gas station, and that's where he met Stacy Stanley. Now, Stacy had a flat tire on her car, and she was actually waiting for a male friend to come help her that she had called. Shawn had approached Stacy, and the male friend came, and the three of them, got her tire fixed or changed her tire so she could be on her way. The male friend leaves, and Shawn asked Stacy if she, let me buy you a coffee. Stacy agrees, and then they leave together. And after they leave together, no one sees Stacy again. Stacy did have family in the area who filed a missing persons report, and police did very little about it. The family felt that because Stacy had a drug history past, that the police were just kind of like, yeah, she probably went on a bender. But they were trying to tell police that she had actually been clean for a year since, before she disappeared. So, that can't be the case. But, even putting pressure on the police, they just felt the police weren't doing what they should have been doing. So then a few days after Stacy had disappeared, Shawn had met up with Jane and went to Jane's apartment and stated that, hey, I got some clothes from my mom and my sister. I wondered if you wanted to go take a look before I donate them. So Jane agreed to go to Shawn's house. Jane goes over to Shawn's house, and while they were there, Jane said that she started kind of reading Bible passages, and they were discussing the Bible. And then all of a sudden, Shawn rips the Bible out of Jane's hand and says, "You are not going anywhere." Jane tried to push Shawn away, but Shawn would, punch her, and then he would choke her until she was barely conscious. Shawn tied her hands to the bed and, in Jane's word, assaulted her in every way imaginable. He would give Jane pills, and he would record the assaults on his cell phone as well. Now, that first night, Jane is still tied up to the bed, and she said that Shawn barely slept, that he was in this paranoia state, kept looking out the windows. Yeah, that first night, he didn't sleep at all. Then the next day, Shawn then continued to assault Jane until the afternoon, when Jane said that he literally wore himself out and literally just passed out on the bed. Now, Jane said that she knew Shawn was in this deep sleep because his phone was right beside him on the other side of her, because she was tied to the bed, remember? And that the notifications and like somebody was calling him, it kept going off, and he was not waking up. He was snoring. He was just in this really deep sleep. And she thought, okay, this is my chance. So she slowly reached over, grabs the phone, and she calls 911. And in a very hushed tone, she tries to tell 911 where she's at, that she's been abducted, and it was Shawn Grate who've done it. Please come save her.
911, what is the address to your emergency? 5 Street Laundromat. What is it? 4th Street Laundromat. What's the problem? I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Shawn Green. Shawn Green? Shawn Grate.
So police did finally find out her location. They arrived. They, was able to save Jane Doe. And they went upstairs to where Jane Doe said Shawn was. And there they found Shawn, still sleeping. So he must have really wore himself out, dick. Anyway, so they take Shawn downtown, and then the police kind of search the abandoned house. And what they find is they find 2 more bodies of women that Shawn killed and just left decomposing in the house. One woman was in an upstairs closet that was taped shut, and the other woman was downstairs in the basement under a pile of trash. So back at the station, they start questioning Shawn. And he was hesitant to say much, and often his answers were kind of incoherent, or he would just clam up. But then they started really putting pressure on him, and then after that pressure, Shawn just kind of went, okay, I will tell you all my crimes. And he just bleh. So they started with the 2 bodies that they found in the house, and they were identified to be Elizabeth Griffin, who was Jane's neighbor, and Stacy Stanley, the one that Shawn helped change the tire. Both had been strangled to death. So Shawn started talking about Elizabeth. He stated that him and Elizabeth had met up after, meeting them through Jane, and that they went over to Elizabeth's apartment and they played Yahtzee and had dinner. Shawn then went home that night. Later that night, Elizabeth called up Shawn and asked if he would like to play more Yahtzee and talk some more, and she would come over to his place. So, of course, he invited her over. He said in the midst of their talking that night, Elizabeth had stated that she was having suicidal thoughts. So Shawn, being the great guy he is, stated that, he was going to strangle her just on the brink of death to show her that she really didn't want to die. Like he was doing her a service. So he attacked her and started choking her. He stated that, in the middle of it, Elizabeth did start fighting and was, kind of as she could, begging him to stop, but he didn't. He was too far into it, and he ended up strangling her to death. He then closed her in a closet and taped her up. So here's the side note on this where I know Shawn's full of shit, okay? So when Elizabeth was found in the closet, she was not only tied up, she was bound, she was naked as well. So if he simply just choked her to, show her she didn't want to die, then why was she tied up and bound? So, sorry, you're full of shit, Shawn. So then Shawn told the story about Stacy Stanley. He stated that after helping her change her tire, they had coffee, and he invited her over to his house. So once they had got to Shawn's house, they were kind of being romantic, and they had started kissing, making out. Shawn stated then he got a little confused. He was confused because when they were changing her tire and that male friend was there helping, he felt that Stacy was flirting with her male friend. And now she was at his house kissing him. So he felt like Stacy was kind of this person that just led everybody on. So obviously Shawn had some major jealousy issues because he just met this woman and he's already jealous of her male friend. And he's seeing things that actually didn't happen. So Shawn, I guess, he said he confronted Stacy about her flirting, and Stacy was like, I wasn't flirting with my friend, and they kind of got in an argument about it. Shawn then attacked her, sexually assaulted her, and recorded it on his cell phone as well. Stacy apparently was still alive after all this, and she had one of those little cans of mace on her keychain. She was able to get her keys, and she attempted to spray him with the mace, and that really made him mad, so then he strangled her to death. He then placed her in the basement under the pile of trash. So he was being charged with murdering Elizabeth and Stacy, but Shawn wasn't done. He had more to say. He stated that he also killed Rebecca Lucy, the sex worker that disappeared in 2015. He stated that she stole $4 from him. Most sites say $4. There's one site that said $40, but either way, it wasn't a lot of money. She stole this money from him. He got mad, so he strangled her and dumped her in the woods. Now, again, her death was ruled as an overdose, but her body was out in the elements for 15 months. So it'd be really hard, depending on what was decomposed, to find strangulation marks by that time. Now, just a side note here, too. Rebecca's family, for whatever reason, even though Shawn admitted to killing Rebecca, they don't think Shawn did it. They actually are leaning more towards that Rebecca stole drugs or got onto the bad side of her drug dealer, pimp, boyfriend, whatever, and that guy killed her. So I'm not sure why they feel that way, but they do. So police took note of that, and then Shawn kept talking, and oh my God, here's another one. So Shawn stated that he goes, you remember that Candace Cunningham that disappeared that you guys couldn't find? dick. He goes, I killed her too. I'll take you to her body. So they get in the car and Shawn leads them to where? The burned down abandoned house that the police didn't really investigate. She wasn't in the house, but she was just shortly away from the house. So if the police would have just walked the perimeter, they probably would have found her body. But again, so she was out in the elements for like a year as well, pretty decomposed. Shawn stated that after they got engaged, that he just had enough of Candace. I guess she wouldn't shut up about the engagement. She was really excited about it. And he just snapped one day and strangled her and then dumped her outside the house and then set the house on fire. Why he set the house on fire, I'm not sure. I mean, to me, I think he wanted her body to be found. And then when it wasn't, it was like, I don't know. So authorities are like, okay, we have, four dead women. Is that all? And he's like, no, there's one more. Shawn went on to say that his very, very first victim happened in 2007, and he couldn't quite remember her name. It was something like Diana or Dana or something. Her body was found by police in a wooded area shortly after her murder, but her identity was never determined on who it was. So Shawn stated that this gal, the two were not romantic, but she was delivering magazines door to door, and he had gotten a couple subscriptions. This is when he was living at his dad's house, okay? And he was dating Christina at the time. He had gotten a couple subscriptions, and she failed to deliver the magazines to Shawn, apparently. So when he saw her next walking down the street, he lured her in the house and he ended up stabbing her and killing her. He would hide her body in the basement for a few days and then he went and dumped her in a wooded area. In 2019, the project of finding like unidentified bodies, that project got involved and they were able to determine through DNA that this unidentified body, her name was Dana Lowry. Dana had 2 daughters and a husband, but they were kind of separated. And her husband stated that yes, she was delivering magazines door to door. And he just thought that she disappeared and abandoned the family, so he didn't try to go find her or anything. And here's a side note as well. So while Shawn and Christina were living in his dad's house, so she said that she was like cleaning up some grout between the tiles in the kitchen and that she kept running across these like dark reddish brownish spots or like, pools, and that she really had to use like elbow grease to get it up, and she wasn't sure what it was. Like the furthest thing from her mind was that it was human blood. She thought like a thing of red food coloring exploded or something, like because it was kind of thick, and I mean she really didn't know. She did ask Shawn about it, and Shawn said it didn't matter what it was, just clean it. So, of course, later they found out that it was Dana's blood. That's what she was cleaning up. So, at first, Shawn pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Typical. But he did withdraw that plea and then ended up pleading guilty to the 2 murders of Elizabeth and Stacy in order to avoid the death penalty. Now, authorities do believe that there may have been more victims that Shawn killed because the first killing was in 2000 and then the next killing was 2015, and they don't believe like that 8-year gap he didn't do something. Shawn has never admitted to any further murders, nor have they connected him with any. So, he was with Christina most of that time, so it could be that he didn't kill because he was taking it out on Christina, unfortunately. Shawn was found guilty of murdering Elizabeth and Stacy and kidnapping Jane Doe and assaulting her. And prior to his sentence on June 1st, 2018, Shawn had told the court that he'd like to stay alive through this. Okay. Then the judge sentenced him to death. with a slam of the gavel. Wah, wah. In 2019, when they figured out who Dana Lowry was, they then officially charged Shawn with her death as well. He was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on top of his death sentence. So according to the courts, he had to serve his death sentence and then serve his life sentence. How does that work? Anyway, it just made me laugh the way it was written. He was charged with Candace's murder too, and that was part of the life sentence. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But yeah, so he was charged guilty in all 5 women's murders. So in Ohio, when the death penalty is a sentence for a criminal, the defendant is entitled to an automatic appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court reviewed it, and so although Shawn's chaotic childhood and potential mental illnesses, he was never officially evaluated or diagnosed, but his chaotic childhood and his potential mental illnesses were given consideration in these crimes, but the Supreme Court did conclude that each murder clearly outweighed the mitigating factors, since he did know right from wrong and he was hiding the bodies and stuff like that. So they determined that the death penalty was appropriate in his case and the death sentence stood. In December 2020, Shawn was appointed a new lawyer because he said that his old lawyers were incapable of anything, and the whole point was to reopen the death penalty case to try to get that dropped, but I haven't seen where anything has been filed or changed, so the death penalty still stands as far as I've found. One source says that Shawn was set to be executed in 2025, but all the other sources say that no date has been set, so I guess we'll see. If something was to happen and the death penalty does get dropped, at least he's still never getting out of jail because he has to serve a life sentence with no possibility of parole. So at least we have that. What a peach. So in closing, interesting tidbit is that apparently when Shawn and Christina was the 5-year relationship, Shawn did propose to Christina. And he gave her a ring that he said was his mother's. Now, his mother was a, kind of petite lady. And it was, had small fingers, and the ring was too big for Christina. And Christina always wondered, okay, if his mom is so petite and the ring is still big for me because I'm a bigger woman than his mom, how can this be his mother's ring? So turns out years later, that ring was actually Dana Lowry's, the first victim. So after Shawn killed Dana, he took her ring and then used it to propose to Christina. So again, this guy is peach, I'm telling you. So both Christina and Amber, Shawn's ex-wife, had stated that when they found out that Shawn had killed these women, they both really didn't know how to feel. They knew his anger problems and his rage problems, and knowing that they could have been victims, it was a little overwhelming. And then the overwhelming turns to anger, and you just go all through these emotions. But in the end, they were glad that they got out with their lives, and they feel really bad for everybody that didn't. So there is the story of Shawn Grate. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you'd like to become a feline friend, please hit that subscribe button and be sure to give me a like if you like these videos. And if you'd like to become a feline fan, please hit that join button for special perks. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you in the next true crime case or story. Thank you again for sticking with this schedule. It has really helped me out personally, and we might get back to weekly in the winter. So thank you, guys. See you later. Bye.